Today we're going to start learning about the reproductive system, and the rest of the week we will also be learning about the endocrine system. So we're going to start with the male reproductive system and then go to the female reproductive system, and then on I think it is Wednesday or Thursday of this week, you guys will be moving on to the endocrine system. All right, so first up, the male reproductive system. So this is a side anatomy here. So it says down here, I'm just going to kind of read these and add some things in. Like other living things, human beings reproduce. It's what keeps the population going. In humans, the male and female reproductive systems work together to make a baby. All right, so there's something called the seminal vesicles, so that's highlighted in purple here, and then pointing right here to this kind of like green part. It says it's located at the base of the bladder, so this is the bladder right here, this pink one. The two seminal vesicles secrete a thick fluid that nourishes the sperm. The bladder is the muscular sac that stores urine, or pee, until it is released through the urethra. Prostate gland. This walnut-sized gland surrounds a portion of the urethra and produces some of the fluid in semen. So all of these work together in the male reproductive system. The vas deferens, again, it's highlighted in green here. They're highlighting everything that we're talking about on each slide in green so you can see it a little bit better. These are called the vas deferens. These are also called the ductus deferens. This thin muscular tube transports the sperm from the epididymis to the urethra. The urethra is the tube that carries semen and urine out of the penis. So here's the urethra right here, goes from the bladder and then obviously out. The scrotum, also called the scrotal sac, hangs under the penis and contains the testicles and epididymis. So again, that is highlighted in green. The penis is made of two parts, the shaft, which is the main part, and then the glans, which is the tip, sometimes called the head. The penis delivers sperm through the urethra. So sperm is delivered through the urethra, and so is pee. Testicle, again highlighted in green here. The two testicles, or testes, produce sperm and the male sex hormone testosterone. So testosterone is actually produced by females as well, just not in as high of amounts, because women obviously have different reproductive organs than males do, but there's different parts of the body that produce those hormones as well. So females actually produce testosterone as well, just not nearly as much as men. The epididymis is right here in green, again highlighted. Next to each testicle, the epididymis is a light-colored tube where sperm is stored. From here, sperm are transported to the vas deferens. All right, so this is like the front view of the male reproductive system. All the ones up until this point were the side view. So this is just the front view. You can see it's pretty symmetrical here. If I go back, this whole system, it almost kind of looks like a figure eight system. So if sperm is stored in here, goes up through here, just like that, and then out. All right, it's not a figure eight loop though. That would be a problem if it was constantly going in a loop. Not good. You would have some serious health issues if that were the case. But it goes in kind of a figure eight pattern until it is excreted. Okay, now we're going to move on to the female reproductive system. Like other living things, human beings reproduce. It's what keeps the population going. So in humans, this happens when the male and female reproductive systems work together to make a baby. So this first slide is very similar to the first slide of the male reproductive system, where it's just kind of telling you the purpose of the reproductive system, because obviously if this wasn't a thing, none of you would be here. I wouldn't be here. We need the reproductive system in order to carry on human life. Animals obviously need it too, and humans are grouped into the animal category in science, but we're kind of at the top of the animal chain, if you will. All right, the female reproductive system includes a group of organs in a woman's lower belly and pelvis. The pelvis is kind of like the hip area, but like internal. It's called the reproductive system because it supports the development and growth of a baby. This system is also responsible for a girl's monthly period called menstruation. Also, the menstrual period can also be irregular, so it doesn't necessarily have to be monthly. So sometimes it can skip a month, or sometimes it can skip a couple of months. Sometimes it can be like 2 weeks back to back. It just depends on the person. But generally speaking, it's around 28 days or a month. I'm just going to go back really quick here. Okay. The female reproductive system has several parts. The uterus is where a fetus or baby grows. It is a hollow, pear-shaped organ with a muscular wall. So this is pointing to the uterus right here, this whole thing. And that's what will support the baby. And then these things represented by these purple blobs are called the ovaries. Now, actually the ovaries and the testes for that matter are actually a white color. So a lot of the colors that you're seeing here or in like the male reproductive system, you saw them highlighted in green, that's not actually the color. But what's really unique about the ovaries and then the testes in the males is that they're kind of like a pearly white color. There are 2 ovaries, one on either side of the uterus. Ovaries make eggs and hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Males also produce estrogen as well, but not nearly as much as females. These hormones help girls develop and make it possible for a woman to have a baby. The ovaries release an egg as part of a woman's cycle. When an egg is released, it is called ovulation. Each egg is tiny, about 1/10 the size of a poppy seed. That's like really, really small. The tubes are called fallopian tubes. Fallopian tubes go from the uterus to the ovaries. So from the uterus to the ovaries, as you can see here on each side. During ovulation, an ovary releases an egg into the fallopian tube next to it. So during ovulation, the ovary will release an egg, a really, 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 really tiny one, through the fallopian tube. The cervix is the lower part of the uterus that opens into the vagina. During childbirth, the cervix expands about 4 inches or 10 centimeters, so the baby can travel from the uterus through the vagina and into the world. So the baby stays in here, right, until it's time for it to be born. And then the cervix is what expands, so that way the baby can be born. The vagina is a tube that connects the uterus to the outside of the body. The entrance to the vagina on the outside of the body is called the vaginal opening. So they don't actually show like the vaginal opening down here, but it's just basically the end of the tube, the end of the vagina, then you have the vaginal opening. The vaginal opening is a hole between a woman's legs, below her urethra, where pee comes out, and above her anus, where poop comes out. Here you can see how the vagina connects to the uterus. So unlike males release sperm through the urethra as well as release urine through the urethra. Women don't have that, obviously, because women don't produce sperm. So the urethra is right next to the vagina in the female. So this is showing you the bladder here. The uterus is kind of like folded right on top of it, and that's where the baby will develop right inside there. And then you have the vagina, and then this is showing the vaginal opening there. During sex, sperm cells travel through the vagina to the uterus and fallopian tubes. In the fallopian tube, the sperm meets the egg that was released from the ovary during ovulation. So I want to make a note here. When sperm is released into the uterus, the vagina and the uterus, there's like millions of sperm, but only one little teeny tiny sperm cell will find that one little teeny tiny egg cell, and that's what will become the 2 parts of the DNA that are needed to make a baby. So we can't have more than one sperm cell fertilizing an egg, because then that doesn't become viable anymore. We've got too much DNA. Back when we learned about chromosomes, we learned you have to have a certain number, right? So you get half your DNA from your mom, half your DNA from your dad. So that way, when one sperm cell fertilizes an egg, the egg actually puts up this like really crazy defense wall that doesn't allow any other sperm in once one has fertilized that egg. Pretty crazy. And also the chances of even one sperm cell finding an egg, it's just like, it's crazy to think about because it's so tiny. There's so many sperm cells. It's pretty insane if you think about it. And the other thing is, when we learned about the chromosomes and DNA, each one of these sperm cells has some sort of different variation from your dad of his DNA. So depending on which sperm cell fertilizes that egg can determine whether you are going to have brown hair or blonde hair, blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, or different facial features, or different, I don't know, just like a widow's peak. We talked about dominant and recessive traits. Maybe, like for instance, my dog, he is deaf, so that might have been something genetic, or maybe it was something that happened when he was born. It could have been a number of reasons. But if it was genetic, maybe he got that one sperm cell, or even part of the egg cell's DNA, that was slightly damaged and had him be deaf when he was born. All right, this is showing you the size comparison. So the egg, even though it's really tiny, we talked about it's like tinier than a poppy seed, it's way bigger than even the sperm cells. The sperm cells are super, super tiny. So there's only one egg cell released a month. And when we say a month, it's just like a generalization. It's about a month, but some people, like I said, it might be every 2 months or maybe every couple of weeks. It just kind of depends on the individual, but generally speaking, it's about a month. But one egg cell will be released a month. If there are no sperm cells to fertilize that egg, then that's what a menstruation is, or having your period is, because it doesn't need that egg because it's not viable, it's not a baby. But if a sperm cell is to fertilize that egg, that's when you have the right amount of DNA to create a baby. Just the egg on its own isn't going to become a baby. It's not a baby. It's only half the amount of DNA required to make a human. It needs the other half, which comes from the sperm. So if a sperm cell fertilizes the woman's egg, it's the first step in reproduction, also known as getting pregnant. So if all goes well, in 9 months, a baby will be born. So through that developmental process, the baby will start to develop after the sperm fertilizes the egg. That's as soon as it becomes a baby, right then and there. And then that baby will continue to develop over the next couple of months until it is born. And babies are usually born at around 9 months from the time of conception all the way through development in the mother's uterus, and then the baby will be born about 9 months later. Sometimes, however, there are complications where they have to have the baby earlier, whether the doctors induce that or whether the mother just goes into labor early, but that can cause problems. Sometimes the baby doesn't come in exactly 9 months, and it's been like 9 months and 2 weeks or 10 months, and so the doctor will have to induce delivery so that way the baby is healthy. Okay, so I don't have a slide for this one, but I'm using the book here. So I'm just going to kind of read some highlights on the human life cycle. But let me see. Development before birth. So I think you guys know, but they first start out when the sperm fertilizes an egg. It's called a zygote. So that little tiny baby is called a zygote. And then the cells start to split and what's called differentiate, which means like your eye cells become eye cells and your arm cells become arm cells and your fingernail cells become fingernail cells. Every little cell is told what to become. So then you become an embryo, and then they call what the next stage is a fetus. So you go zygote, embryo, fetus. So I'm going to read this like protection and nourishment section here from the textbook. If you have your textbook, I'm on page 684. But protection and nourishment says, just like you, the embryo and fetus need nourishment and protection to develop properly. Soon after the embryo attaches to the uterus, many changes take place. The hollow ball of cells grows inward. New membranes form. The membranes and other structures that form during development protect and nourish the developing embryo and later the fetus. There's something called the amniotic sac, which is a membrane that surrounds the embryo and develops into a liquid-filled sac. That's what helps cushion and protect the baby. And then there's something called the placenta. So another membrane forms, which helps to form the placenta, which is the link between the embryo or the baby and the mother. In the placenta, the embryo's blood vessels are located next to the mother's blood vessels. Blood from the two systems does not mix. So that's how you can have a different blood type than your mom. So when we talked about blood types, you might not have the same blood type as your mom. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the blood doesn't mix. The baby's blood is separate from the mom's. Let me see, what else do I want to point out? So the embryo receives nutrients, oxygen, and other substance from the mother. It gives off carbon dioxide and other wastes. So when the mother eats through the placenta, the nutrients that she eats goes partly to the baby, so the baby is fed as well. That's often why if you have a younger brother or sister, when your mom was pregnant with them, she has to eat more than usual because she's literally growing a baby and she has to feed the baby as well through what she eats. The umbilical cord is a rope-like structure called the umbilical cord, which forms between the fetus and the placenta. It contains blood vessels that link the fetus to the mother. However, the two circulatory systems remain separated by a thin barrier. That barrier separates the fetus and mother's blood. The barrier that separates the fetus and the mother's blood prevents some diseases from spreading from the mother to the fetus. However, substances such as alcohol, chemicals, and tobacco, and many other drugs can pass through the barrier to the fetus. For this reason, pregnant women should not smoke, drink alcohol, or take any drugs without a doctor's approval. They also say that drinking too much coffee while you're pregnant is not good for the baby either, because caffeine can have an effect on development. So then that brings us to where we kind of left off with the female reproductive system. So birth, after about 9 months of development inside the uterus, the baby is ready to be born. The birth of a baby takes place in 3 stages: labor, delivery, and afterbirth. So labor, during the first stage of birth, strong muscular contractions of the uterus begin. These contractions are called labor. The contractions cause the cervix, we talked about the cervix, to enlarge, eventually allowing the baby to fit through the opening. Labor may last from about 2 hours to more than 20 hours. And then delivery, that is the second stage of birth. During normal delivery, the baby is pushed completely out of the uterus, through the vagina, out of the mother's body. The head usually comes out first. At this time, the baby is still connected to the placenta by the umbilical cord. Delivery of the baby usually takes less time than labor does, from several minutes to an hour or so. Shortly after delivery, the umbilical cord is clamped, then cut about 5 centimeters from the baby's abdomen. Within 7 to 10 days, the remainder of the umbilical cord dries up, falls off, and leaves a scar called the navel or belly button. That's how you get your belly button. And depending on where that umbilical cord is cut, will cause you to have an innie or an outie belly button. In case you ever wondered why, that is the reason. It depends on where your umbilical cord was cut when you were born. There's something else I wanted to mention. What was it? Let me just backtrack real quick. Oh, if the baby does not come out head first and you notice its feet first, that's called a breech baby. And sometimes DOs or doctors of osteopathic medicine can actually manipulate the mother's body and the baby to get it to turn around. But oftentimes they'll have to do a C-section if that does happen, or maybe there's another complication. The baby's too big, so they have to do a C-section, which is where they actually cut open the mother's stomach and then the uterus to get the baby out that way through surgery. That can happen for several reasons. Like, for instance, I was a C-section not because I was too big. My sister was really big as a baby. I think she weighed like 10 pounds something ounces. I was about 6 pounds something ounces, so I was pretty tiny. But I was wrapped up and tangled up in the umbilical cord, and it was cutting off my oxygen supply, so I couldn't breathe. It was basically wrapped around my neck, and it was choking and suffocating me. So they needed to do an emergency C-section because they were afraid I was going to die if they didn't do the C-section. So sometimes they have to do C-sections for that reason as well. Third stage, after birth. About 15 minutes after delivery, the third stage of the birth process begins. Contractions of the uterus push the placenta and other membranes out of the uterus through the vagina. This stage, called afterbirth, is usually completed in less than an hour. And then it goes to birth and the baby. So it's just saying that the birth process is stressful for both the mother and the baby. Obviously, the baby is pushed and squeezed as it's traveling out of the mother's body. The mother's body is actually releasing adrenaline, which has something to do with the endocrine system, which you will learn about in a few days. There's something called multiple births. I'm on page 687 now. This is when you have twins. So you can have identical twins or fraternal twins. And identical twins are when a sperm fertilizes a single egg. And that's when you get 2 twins that are the same gender that look pretty identical. If you know any identical twins, when you first met them, you might have gotten them confused. Maybe they looked exactly alike, but as you got to know them, you got to realize, oh, they actually look a little bit different, and you start to notice the features that make them just a tad different looking. Fraternal twins, fraternal has to do, it's a Latin word, or it comes from Latin. Fraternal means like from the dad's side or male. So 2 different sperm fertilize 2 different eggs. It doesn't mean the twins are going to both be male. It just means that your dad had 2 sperm that fertilized 2 eggs from your mom. This happens. It's rare, but it does happen where you'll have fraternal twins. So it can be 2 boys or 2 girls or a boy and a girl. So in the example in the book, it's showing you two twins. One's a boy, one's a girl, which is pretty cool. The next couple of pages is just talking about different stages. So you start with infancy, then go to childhood, then adolescence, and then you go to adulthood, and that is the human life cycle. Okay, before I close out on this reproductive system topic here, I did want to point out, so I feel like for whatever reason in our culture, like it's like, oh, it's like so weird to talk about the reproductive system or whatever. And yeah, maybe it is a little bit, but it shouldn't be. There's so much science behind it and so many like different little things that have to play together to make everything work properly. It's really crazy and amazing that it actually works. But if you have any questions on this, like, I don't know, maybe you were giggling through the video. If you were, that's fine, whatever. But get over your giggles. Try to see it from the science. Sorry, my dog's barking. From the science aspect of it, because this is really a crazy system that works to produce life. Like, how crazy is that? I know some students have dogs that their family has bred, so you may have gotten to see the mom dog. She was probably really, really pregnant, and then when she had all the puppies, it's crazy because you're like, wow, these puppies literally didn't exist like a couple of months ago. And then once the eggs were fertilized, dogs are different, that's why they can have so many puppies at once. Like humans usually only have one baby unless they have twins or triplets or quadruplets. But it's crazy to think about. Those little puppies didn't exist. Your dog didn't exist. Like my dog is almost 2 years old. So 3 years ago, he wasn't even a thing. He didn't even exist. It took his mom and dad to make him and all of his brothers and sisters, which I'm very grateful for because you guys all know I love my dog. So even though this might be kind of, you guys are in middle school and I think you're old enough to handle this and be mature about it, but if you have any questions on this, because I feel like in our culture, and our culture is getting better at it, but they always kind of shy away from talking about this sort of thing. Maybe it's just because I'm a science major. I have a degree in biology, so like I just find all the science aspects of things so fascinating. But if you have a question on something or you're confused about something, please don't hesitate to ask. Don't be awkwarded out. It's okay. This is like purely science, so if you have any questions on this, please don't hesitate to ask, and I will answer your questions as best as I can with my biology degree, science background knowledge. So all that to say, I just wanted you guys to know you can ask me questions. If you have questions, don't feel awkward. This is just pure science, and in all honesty, it's pretty crazy and cool how it all works. And I know you probably get a lot of this in health class too. So this is like very much so the science aspect and the biology aspect of the reproductive system. I will make these slides available for you guys so you can go back and look at them because you will have a quiz on this. I believe it's on Wednesday of this week.